Well, hello, my friends and viewers. This is going to be a little bit of an unusual type of presentation. May seem a bit rambly. It just depends on your viewpoint. Now, a couple of status chats ago, I told you with a little tease what's in the box. Well, I'm not going to tell you what's in the box, but now it's time to find out what's in the box. And I have one of these guys come in. And it's a little cord connected device, plugs into a receptacle, and it looks like a computer, back of a computer type thing. And if I get where's my finger? Here we are. This is a little thermostat for low ambient conditions. If the air gets too cold, it turns itself off. And on this other side, you turn this around, we have the listing information, UL listing, ETL. It's done to ETL 507, I think it is. And this is a humidistat. What this does is this is for increasing the airflow under a house, crawl space ventilator, because it has come to attention that a lot of people go full tilt boogie on encapsulating crawl spaces because somebody suggests they have a problem, and it just ends up, the solution seems to be throw money at it, make it go away, and that's not always appropriate. So a little bit of education might be appropriate, and that's what we're here to talk to you today. Let me go ahead and flip the little sales sheet straight off your internet. And this is the company. See that TJ? I don't know how you pronounce it. Trenderland, I think, is as close as I'm going to get to. And it's got a little illustration. It's designed to pull air through the underside of your house. And there's a couple of different models. There's a one fan model. Then there's a fan with a humidistat model and one with a dual fan. I think this is 220 cubic feet per minute. And they give you a little formula, calculate the size, and to get a certain number of air exchanges under your house. Is this required? Is it necessary? I don't know. It depends on who built your house, when they built the house, and whether or not they built it to what we now consider to be the current cream of the crop standard. And I have some 2018 International Residential Code pulled up that we'll talk about in just a second. But before we do that, let's ask, where do we see these issues potentially coming from? Okay. Well, let's start with the law and rule for a home inspection. You know, when you buy a home, there's a lot of different inspections you go through. We have a home inspection period. Let me switch the screen. We have a home inspection period, and it's like this long, a certain number of days after you get the contract. This is when you do all of your inspections. And a lot of people think that a home inspector, one inspection is all you need. And in fact, you have the right not to do any inspections if you want to, but you can't, if it discovers a latent problem or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You had the opportunity. So there's a specific time, and a professional such as myself are going to tell you, get everything you want done during this time frame. And that's what we do. Now, a home inspector, the reason I say home inspection is not everything, it doesn't cover everything, it's limited by law not to do everything. And we'll go ahead and turn this on. And before I do this, when I get finished with this, you might think I'm bashing home inspectors, and I'm not. I'm just trying to tell you, we all have a side of the street to walk on, and I don't hold myself out as an expert. I just share a thought with you as entertainingly as possible, and you make up your own mind. So here happens to be the Tennessee law for current through the 2020 regular session. So this is the current issue of the law. I didn't pull up one accidentally. That's out of date for the Tennessee Home Inspection Licensing Act of 2005. And as you can see right here, it is TCA 626302, the definitions. And we're going to read some definitions. We're going to go to 3A. A home inspection means a visual analysis for the purpose of providing a professional opinion of the condition of a residential building, ancillary building, any reasonable, accessible installed components, and the operation of the building system, including any controls normally operated by the owner of the building for the following component. Now notice this, for the following components. For the following components. Notice this word up here, a visual analysis. Now, I'm not going into legal definition, but I would say a visual analysis is using these. your peepers, your eyeballs, your visual senses, your sight, not tools, mechanics, and things of that nature. So I'm going to say that it excludes thermometers. I would say that would exclude drones. I would say it would exclude snake cameras, FLIR cameras, forward-looking infrared, the temperature looking into walls. I would say it would exclude tools to discover stuff not readily apparent by simply looking with an educated eye. Okay, that's what I'm anticipating. Visual analysis means it's not taking the home's temperatures. It's not putting air conditioning gauges on equipment. It's not the home inspection under this license is none of those things. It's looking at it, see if it works. Turn the thermostat on. Did it come on? Did it get cold? Did the water run? Did we turn the taps on? Do we have functional drainage? Do we have functional flow? Now, what does it say for the following components? Maybe I need to go backwards. For the following components. Highlighted right there. Heating systems, cooling systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems, structural components, foundations, roof coverings, exterior, internal components, and any other site aspects that affects a residential dwelling. So it's got to be one of these systems or one of these two things. Now, what could be, just talking out loud, thinking, what could be a site aspect that affects a residential dwelling? Well, what if you lived on a hill and you had a retaining wall? Well, I would tend to think that a retaining wall is fairly important to that home. Okay, so it would have a retaining wall. If the wall's cracked or showing signs that it's about to fold or something, I would say that is a site component that would have an effect. I would think a driveway that has in terrible condition or something that limits your access to get to the building might be a site aspect. Okay, not making judgments, just thinking, what is it? Because the law says heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing, structural foundations, roof coverings, and that's roof coverings. The structure that holds the roof up is actually the structural up here, and the interior and exterior components, and the rule will tell us what that is. Now, that's what the law authorizes. Now let's go see what a home inspection isn't. According to the law, the state law, a home inspection does not mean and compliance inspection for building codes or any other adopted codes by the state or political subdivision of the state. It says it's not a code compliant. One of the things that I see from time to time, and I've had people complain, is they'll do, well, this old house had an S-trap, and an S-trap is shaped like you might think it was, shaped like a snake. One time they were not permitted by, they weren't regulated by code. Now current code says you don't use S-traps. But just because a house has an S-trap, if it's a newer code, it doesn't have to comply to that, and a home inspector doesn't do codes compliance. He's limited to what? Functional flow and functional drainage and things of this nature. It's just do the systems work. It's not to gauge how many years we have left on the roof or any of that stuff, or whether or not the HVAC is wearing out or getting old, because he doesn't know. He can't even put any gauges on it. He is limited to visual inspection, okay? And then we go through there, and it talks about it's not for a lender report, and it's not going to cross the line for an architect or engineer's job. And then it talks about you need an inspection report. And I'm going to go down to 4D of this law. It says a statement that the report does not address environmental hazards, including. So I'm not a genius, and I don't play one on TV. I don't have a mayonnaise jar on Funkin' Wagnall's porch. I can't see the future. I can't see the past unless I lived it. But what does this statement in the law say? That a home inspection report does not address environmental hazards. Pretty well much into that statement. I think that's a complete, and it includes lead-based paint. Well, how do we learn about lead-based paint? To be quite honest, we learn about lead-based paint from the residential disclosure requirement. So if a homeowner has a pre-72, I think it is, house that might have lead-based paint in it, and he knows it, he has to tell you. The same thing would go for radon, asbestos, cockroaches, any of these things that are on the residential disclosure list, if someone knows it, they have to tell it. Even if it's a flip. If somebody flips the house and rips out part of the kitchen and discovers he has something in there he has to address, even though he didn't live there, they still got to disclose what you find when you know it. You have to tell it. When you know it, you have to tell it. But the residential inspection, the home inspector, does not address environmental hazard. By law, it just says that. Lead-based paint, radon, asbestos, cockroaches, rodents, pesticide, treated lumber, fungus, mercury, carbon monoxide, or other similar environmental hazard. Now we'll flip over to the rule. This happens to be the rules. Okay, let me slide on up and find where we get what it doesn't have under the reporting. Okay, it'll say, here we go. How close, how similar, let me zoom in on this page. What does this statement say? Sounds just like the law to me. A statement that the report does not address environmental hazards, including lead-based paint, radon, asbestos, cockroaches, rodents, pesticides, treated lumber, fungus, mercury. And if we go down, we pick up the other two. And we see that this is the current rule pulled off the Secretary of State. Carbon monoxide, similar hazard. Now, how close did that look to the law? Pretty close, right? The law and the rule pretty well much agree that the following things are not to be included in the home inspector report. Lead-based paint, radon, asbestos, lead-based paint, radon, asbestos. They parallel pretty close. I mean, I'm not practicing law to do that, right? Well, let's look at something else. So how do we get the environmental stuff inspected? Well, we hire an environmental inspector. Do I provide you an environmental inspector? No, you have to find your own inspector. Well, look, if I happen to know somebody, I might give you a list of 3 names if I can come up with 3. But these things are to be investigated under a different inspection. Looks like according to the law. Now, what about E? This is a different inspection. A statement that the report does not address wood-destroying insects and organisms. That's the law. Do we have something similar in the rule? The statement that it does not do subterranean systems, sewage, water. That is your water pipes, your leads to the road, your what else? Septic. Says you don't do septic. Go back to the law. A statement that a report does not address subterranean systems, components, and whatever. So the law says they don't do bug reports. Well, common sense would tell you that, so we can probably find somebody to do that. Now, you notice this word right here, wood-destroying insects and organisms under the law. So I had a couple weeks ago, I had a special guest come in from Arrow, an entomologist, who works with Arrow and their family of companies. And in that live interaction we had, we talked about brown rot or brown fungus, the brown rot, the white rot, and the other one that I can't pronounce that has the rhizomorphs. And I don't know if you know what a rhizomorph is, but it's basically little tentacles that go down and they suck up the water and they bring it up to keep the wood wet. And my expert there told me that you don't have wood fungus problem unless your wood tests to 28% moisture content. And you have to have a tool to detect 28%. I don't have one. And apparently, since this is a visual inspection, neither will your home inspector. But it does have some very specific characteristics. Brown rot looks like char on a building you see when it breaks down. There's some pictures. We have experts for that. So you would call, quote, your termite guy would come in. If you want to have the wood destroying inspection, you would have that looked at by a professional. Now, can a home inspector can he trigger one of these inspections for just cause? And the question would be, of course, if it causes a structural issue, a structural component problem, then he can do it. Okay, whether it be anything, termites, beetles, post beetles, wood destroying fungus, natural rot, any of these things that might have it, they can do it. Because under structural, I made that go away, number 11, structural components and systems, foundation floors, blah, 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 goes through here and it tells you what we look at. And it says the home inspector shall probe the structural component where deterioration is suspected. So to me, it looks like the rule is saying you have to suspect actual deterioration. So if the wood's not soft and crumbly and falling apart, then I would say that's what the just cause is for him to trigger a bug report or a wood destroying insect organism type of report. And it talks about they will look under the crawl spaces and basement and attic unless it's particularly dangerous to them or inaccessible. So we have some exclusions and we have some things that we will and will not look for. Again, sewage disposal. So who would be responsible for getting the subterranean components? Well, that could be a plumber, could be your septic man, could be someone, but we know it from what looks like the law saying who it's not. So you would call Scott's or somebody to come check to make sure that your septic is working. And in Tennessee, without taking a backhoe and digging up the top of your tank and checking the sludge level or whatever, there's really not much they can do short of running enough water through it at maximum rate and seeing if it's starting to come up in the yard, not being handled or not being processed. So a septic installer who's licensed by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, you'd probably call them if you want to have your septic inspected, okay? If you want to have your wiring inspected beyond flipping the switch on to find out that everything comes on when they tell you it comes on when you flip the switch, you get a licensed electrical guy. Same thing with any of these other contractors. If you want to do your pest, you get a pest guy coming there. They are the ones who do it. And you have a limited window to get all of your inspections in. But a lot of the problems that you'll have under a house are because of moisture. Most things in this world have to have a cool drink of water somewhere. There's some animals that get most of their water through munching on grass and what all, but they've got to have, most things have to have a source of moisture. So you keep it dry, you keep it nice. So let's look at something else we have here. We'll go to an environmental hazard that was specifically mentioned in the law as not being covered is radon. Okay, now what you see here is the Tennessee Department of Health. Let me shrink her back down now. Tennessee Department of Health, government site, not me, I'm not pretending to be the expert, government site. Healthy homes, this is the radon program. What is radon? Is radon a problem? What are the health hazards? You can educate yourself at your leisure of what radon is and what risk it has. And it goes through, it talks about the problem. Now, I have something hot ready to go here. This map is kind of your, I guess it's generated off the data that the state has recovered through the Environment and Conservation with the Department of Health. Here is your map. It says right here, TDEC, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, considers radon to be a very serious problem in our state. No matter where you live, you're not scot-free. So I would say the green is probably a visual indicator that you're not real high level here, but not zero, and red being relatively high, and the yellow somewhere in between. So I live in Rutherford County. You can click that, and you can go look at Rutherford County. And it talks about the health effects. Now, interesting to see, the data displayed is not to be used as a measure of predicting whether an untested home does or does not have radon. This next cut, the Tennessee Department of Health and Tennessee Radon Program support the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. TDEC supports the EPA belief that every home should be tested in order to know the home's radon level. So the government, this site, Tennessee, is telling us, in their opinion, they support the EPA's suggestion that every home get tested. It's not a mandate, but they can. So what do we have up here? If we come up to, how do I get my home tested somewhere? Here we go. How can I get a test for my radon for my home? And you click this, and this page is free radon test kits. And here I have highlighted the statement that says, I guess due to COVID, we're not doing free test yet, but you can get your home inspection test at just about any Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. You can buy it directly. I think it says something in here somewhere. Here we go. Radon tests are available for purchase at many home improvement stores. We apologize for the inconvenience. We don't have the free test today, but you can go get it. So anytime you want to, you can get your home tested for radon. Now here's the thing. Remember, if you're a homeowner and you test your home for radon, you have to disclose that as a hazard. It's going to show up, I think, in that home disclosure list. Do you know? Yes. Does it have radon? Yes. No, I don't know. If you get it tested and it has radon, I would say you would have to go with that assumption until it tests clean, until it tests without it. But what is the solution for radon? It's airflow. A lot of times it's just simply ventilating. In fact, I can show you some pictures. We get to the building code in just a little bit, residential building code. Now let's look at another one. I want to compare this to this bad boy. Several years back, the world got upended by mold, mildew, the Stachybotrys. Okay. Well, first of all, there are some molds which are toxic. Toxic black mold or Stachybotrys is one of them. There's no mistaking Stachybotrys. It's a slimy mold. It smells like pee. It smells like urine. It smells like an old truck stop. You can't miss it, and I believe it's slimy, and it has like its own presentation. So if it's just little black spots on the wall, it's probably mildew, not mold. And guess who can't test for mold or mildew? You got it. Somebody who can't test for environmental stuff. Let's read what it says, what Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, says about mold. And this is the Department of Health. Ready? You ready to go read a little bit together? What is mold? It is found in virtually every environment and can be found indoors and outdoors year-round. So how would you call mold fixed? That's the problem. If you could test for mold, when would you call it fixed? Well, most time you just disinfect the wall or whatever the affected area, fix the moisture problem that's causing it, and then you paint over or treat it in some form. Okay? And it says right here in this line, moisture is the problem. Mold is a moisture problem. If your house is dry, you don't have mold. Okay? Remember, for wood destroying, you need your wood to be 28% or higher. Okay? So as long as your wood is 20% or so and below moisture, you can't get the wood destroying fungus. It's not going to eat your house, according to my expert at Arrow, and he knows what he's talking about. So it talks about fixing these things. Now, I want to slip on down to this section. We read it together. Let me zoom in and make it a bigger picture. Okay. Should I test my home for mold? Many people think the first step to get rid of mold in their home is to conduct a test to identify the mold, what type of mold it is. And I think they're going to tell you, no, the first step is eliminate the moisture problem. Find where you're getting wet and fix it. And then it says, however, experts do not recommend testing to identify the type of mold because all types cause problems regardless of toxicity. Stachybotrys is toxic. It's one of the few toxic black mold, one of the few that are, but not all of them are. Sometimes they're just an irritant, okay? Now, if you have a home that has a little bit of mold or mildew in it, is that necessarily a defect? Well, I'm allergic to Bradford pears and spirea and goldenrod and honeysuckle. But that doesn't necessarily mean my house, if it's got honeysuckle in the backyard, is defective. It means that I have an allergy, right? So when do we have a problem? So the mold, I would like to tell people, think of mold as being a symptom, not the disease. So if you've got mold, you've got a water problem somewhere. Now the next line, the Tennessee Department of Health does not do mold testing. Well, I would infer that if mold was a significant health hazard, if it was a health hazard per se, the Department of Health would do something about it. Read the next line. We do not know of any government agency that will test your home for mold. Again, because it's not really a problem, I don't think. It's just my opinion. Based upon the sources I read, mold and mildew are not health problems. They're not defects. Perhaps a leak that's caused them might be a defect, but not the mold itself. Read this next line. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDCs, and the EPA do not recommend testing. So I think if you were to try to use mold as a problem, you might have an uphill battle. It might be a tough row to hold, but I don't give advice. I'm just reading off the Tennessee Department of Health, who says the CDC and the EPA don't recommend testing. So if it was a real problem, I would expect some state and federal guidance on that. And it says proper tests are expensive and there's no standards for acceptable mold levels. That's another problem. How do you call it fixed? If you have a mold problem, when do you call it fixed? Okay? I can tell you if we get a water problem, we stop the roof from leaking. We stop the toilet flange from leaking. We stop the leak under the house. We can fix a leak. But how do you call mold fixed? And that's the problem. You can only kind of address it at a time. Since the effect of mold on people can vary greatly, the presence of mold in a home does not apply health risk. Can we read that together? Since the effect of mold on people can vary greatly, the presence of mold in the home does not imply a health risk. So the home inspector can report health risks. Tennessee Department of Health says mold is not a risk. Okay? So they shouldn't be showing up. However, if the water damage is causing something to rot your house, that would be a problem structurally, would it not? I think it probably would. And it talks about moisture meters and digital humidity monitors are relatively inexpensive and available at many home stores. So just check, keep your RH, your relative humidity, checked in places you might need it. Or if you suspect you have a problem, you should see something under the house to indicate it to support that opinion. You don't just go, well, it could. Well, technically speaking, I can't prove to you that Bigfoot's not going to come over the top of my hill, but I'm pretty sure he's not. But if I saw Bigfoot, I would know Bigfoot's possible because I saw him. Well, if I see water problems under a house, I'm pretty good to know I got a problem with water in the house. But if I don't see water problem, doesn't mean that I have to then prepare to deal with something I don't have. And again, one of these power ventilators are designed with the capability to pull extra air through the underside of your house. Well, how much air is necessary? Well, I'm going to switch the screen one more time to me while I pull up the correct tab. And here, got it? Let's look here. This is under the 2018 Residential Building Code, the RIRC, International Residential Code. This happens to be from the second printing 2018. It's the current code. It's not necessarily the current code adopted where your house is that you might be looking at, but it is the latest and greatest that the publishers and writers of the code have available. Okay? And what does it say under here under R408? Let me get my little mouse there. It won't let me highlight, okay? Because I'm on the public access. It says the underfloor space between the bottom of the floor joist and the earth under any building, except spaces occupied by a basement, shall have ventilation openings through the foundation walls or exterior walls. It says your crawl space will be vented if it's a crawl space. If it's a basement, no. It has some exceptions. Okay? So it's not a real tough math problem. You can figure it out if you put the effort to it of whether or not you have adequate ventilation. So what happens if you had, say, an older home that was maybe a little shy on this? Well, chances are it's probably several decades old. If you're going to have a moisture problem, it's probably going to show up by the time you see that house. But sometimes lot and neighborhoods change and conditions can change. You might develop one. Well, before you go to some ridiculously expensive full encapsulation and all this kind of crazy stuff, maybe you just monitor the humidity, and you put a power ventilator under it. Things don't have to be ungodly expensive. Now, let's read some of the next part. The minimum net area for the ventilation opening shall not be less than 1 square feet for 100 square feet of floor space of the underfloor area. So if you had a garage, it's on grade, it's a slab on grade, you wouldn't include that. So you just do the house and not the upstairs square footage, but the downstairs square footage, and you figure out your square footage. Do you have enough square footage by the code to do it? If the code applied to your home, this is the current standard. On an existing home, this does not comply. What do the home inspectors not do? Codes inspection reports. Okay, but you get an idea. You have some resources to give you some kind of a guidance if you're concerned with it. Now, I'm going to slide down here because we're going to talk about the net area. There is an exception. The exception that the total area of ventilation opening shall be permitted to be reduced to 1/1500th of the underfloor area where the ground surface is covered with a class 1 vapor retarder material required to be placed to provide cross ventilation across the space, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let me give you the rundown of that. Well, I'm led to understand, when we go up here, ventilation, your crawl space has to be ventilated. Okay? It doesn't have to even have that piece of plastic. How many people have you heard tell you, oh, it has to have a vapor barrier under there? Well, not according to the current, even the latest code doesn't say you have to have a vapor barrier under your house if you ventilate it. Why would you, right? If you got enough ventilation, you don't have a moisture problem, unless it's caused by something else, water running downhill. So it doesn't have to have a vapor barrier, okay? Now, it says you got to have X amount of air flow, okay? Then it gives you this exception that says you can reduce it to 1/1500th of the required amount if you have, say, that pool liner glued up against the wall. But just because you have a pool liner glued up against the walls and all that kind of stuff does not suggest you have to put an air conditioning unit to dehumidify it, okay? See, this is where people get really confused. Your requirement is that it be ventilated to keep it dry, okay? And it meets that requirement. You get down to here, it says you can reduce the amount of opening if you put like the pool liner stuff in there and keep the moisture way, way down. It doesn't mean you have to close off the vents. But now guess what happens? This next line, unvented crawl space, if you do the pool liner and plug up the air so that it gets no air. Then you have to do this down here in blue. Dehumidification size to provide 70 pints or 33 liters of moisture removal per day for every 1,000 square feet of crawl space below this area. Again, no garages, but below it. So guess what happens? A lot of people who get the pool liner turn around and are forced or suggested, or somebody convinces them that they have to condition that crawl space. The code suggests, the current code, the 2018 code, does not say you have to condition your crawl space. People are confusing encapsulation of the floor area from the moisture and conditioning as two different things. You can be vented and not even have a vapor barrier. If it's adequately ventilated, you can be ventilated and highly reduce that ventilation requirement if you have the kind of encapsulation, the sealed up system. Where you get into problem is when you close off the vents, when you no longer vent underneath your crawl space, your house, because then at that point in time, you start having to insulate up the walls. Now, what happens when you seal the moisture under your house and you put insulation up the wall, that foam insulation up the wall? If my bug guy and people in this industry will tell you, termites need moist ground to crawl in. They need it to dig in. When they come up, one of the characteristics that they have is called mud tunnels. They will actually take that moisture that keeps their little body soft and everything, and they will build, the workers will build little tubes that these little ant-like creatures, these little termites, subterranean termites, crawl through, and they keep protected, keeps them moist. Well, termite can eat foam insulation. And so if we turn around and we put the water down, we may be keeping it off of our wood and off of our structure. But if we haven't treated why that dirt is wet all the time, we might just be putting a Band-Aid on it and hiding it. And what happens in many cases, we have learned since we started these codes, is that the termites then come up, eat the insulation, come up out, and then they find some tiny little crack and they get out and loose underneath the house. Now, the thing is, if I'm not terribly mistaken, and I'm no expert, I've told you that before, if you really want that if your ventilation cannot be made, then you line it with a pool liner and glue everything up with the 6 inches overlap on the seam and all of that kind of stuff. You can still leave your crawl space vented, and you don't have to put an HVAC system to dehumidify it. Okay? Because that's another piece of equipment you got to buy just for the privilege of blocking up your vents. Don't block up the vents. You don't have to put the HVAC in there. You block up the vents, you got to have something to take the moisture out. Don't put the moisture in there. You can do it. Now, and if you air condition it, I think you'll find that the energy code is going to say you have to insulate those basement walls. Now, one termite specialist told me that that is such a problem that they'll leave what they call an inspection line. They'll go up maybe an inch or 6 inches around. They'll only bring that pool liner up so far before it touches the wood, and then leave that block exposed so that if a termite happens to get his way through the wall, okay, if he happens to find his way around under that pool liner up the wall, that then he has a gap between that and the wood, and they'll build a little mud tunnel. And so that the termite inspectors can then look and say, hey, I see mud tunnels on the side of your wall in that little inspection line. I know we got termites coming from underneath it. There's a lot to this, and that's why it's important that you know who to call to represent you in the real estate, and you know who to call that does these reputable inspections, and don't just say inspect everything so that I've told you to inspect everything and therefore I'm not responsible if something bad should happen. I'm one of the people, if you want to tell me I need to inspect for wood destroying insects, and that's outside of your purview, that you can show me a photograph of some sketchy, crumbly piece of wood under my house that looks bad, okay? If you're going to trigger me, otherwise it's up to me to make my decision. Who do I call to have what inspected? See, that's kind of what I'm getting to, because otherwise it can scare the devil out of you. You see a bunch of inspection reports that nobody knows what to do with. They're up to you. I can't determine your inspections for you. I can only tell you when you have to have them done by. So let's put that back. And remember, I said you don't have to have, under the ventilation requirement, in this, it doesn't say you have to put a moisture barrier. But there are some other requirements that you might put a barrier for. Let's look at this one. All right. Protection against subterranean termites. Okay. So subterranean termite control methods. In areas subject to damage from termites, as indicated by the table, protection by one or a combination of the following methods. Well, one of the things is if you're chemically treated with a termicide, that's it. So you don't have to have a vapor barrier, right? Because moisture is done by ventilation. We take care of the moisture by ventilation. Termites, one of the ways you treat for termite, because you have to take care of these little buggers, is a chemical treatment. Termite baiting, like Arrow uses. Arrow uses the termite stations. That is considered safe for protection with the code, the current code. Pressure preservative treated wood, green wood, like if you use your green wood or your yellow wood on your sills where it touches, that's something for termite. Naturally durable termite resistant wood. If you got a wood termites won't eat, golly gee whiz, you don't have to. If it's inherently protected, bugs don't like to eat it. And there's some species they don't. That's good too. Physical barriers, such as locations, cold form steel. So if you got a steel structure, you got a metal building, termites don't eat metal. You don't have to do termite control for a metal building. Physical barriers. This is where a lot of people see that what they're calling a vapor barrier under the house, and they think everybody's got to have a vapor barrier under the house. And if somebody pokes their head under there and they don't see a vapor barrier, they think they've got a substandard situation. Maybe, maybe not. Is it properly vented? This is why you need people who know what they're doing, what they're looking for. And on an existing home, the current codes don't apply because they only have to apply to the codes that were in effect when that house was built. Okay? And if it was added on, then the added on part has to comply with the codes that were in effect at the time they added that added on piece. But you can put just 6 mil poly, the black vinyl poly, not the pool liner stuff with the glued 6-inch overlaps and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to encapsulate it. You can do a black poly 6 mil thickness for a termite barrier, or you can just do termicide. You do bait station, Citricon, and you don't have to put it there at all. And if you have adequate ventilation, you don't have to have a moisture barrier. Not by the residential code, doesn't seem to be. Now, what else might bring us into the need to have that poly flooring? Okay, here's another part of the code. Appendix F, radon control methods. Now, we see that the Tennessee Department of Health and TDEC says that every home in Tennessee should be tested by the federal standard as opposed to mold and mildew, which there's no way to get that tested. And so it's just where people like to go in there and be litigious and make a big mountain out of a molehill. Radon, there's something there. Okay, there's a government recommendation for radon, and it goes through this bit here, and I think I can find it somewhere after I get through all my state counties listed here. Okay, get down to these different methods to take care of radon, and one of the things is a plastic barrier to keep the gas from coming through. So you don't necessarily have to have a plastic liner under your house for moisture. You may need it or may not need it for termites. And for radon, you might need that for that purpose. Let me see if I can find the crawl space 4s. It talks about sealing up passive. Membrane, passive submembrane depressurized system. We got some pictures up at the top that tell you, okay, you have a membrane, you put gravel, and there's different methods to let the gas go through the gravel and get picked up and pumped down the building if you have it. The issue that we have with the radon requirement is, if you see right here, it's in Appendix F. And at the state level, which I just called to talk to an old friend, they're on the state minimum is 2012 IRC, and none of the appendix are adopted. The appendices are not adopted. So this is not, you could look at this, you can make a personal choice, but this is not enforceable by anyone. So radon requirement, 2 branches of the government, Department of Health and Environment Conservation, recommend you get tested, but the building standards don't put the Appendix F into play. And how hard is it to fix it? It's just ventilating, which is another reason why I tend to not like encapsulating the bottom. Although that class 1 membrane is good enough, they say, to keep the radon out of the house. But I just like having, if I got a crawl space, if it's adequately ventilated, I think I solved most of my problem. I keep it too dry for termites. I keep it too dry for my wood destroying fungus. I don't have stuff dripping from the underfloor insulation if it's a newer house that has floor that's insulated. And that's the problem. If you plug up your vents after you've encapsulated with the pool liner, you have to dehumidify it. You don't have to dehumidify it. You can still do the liner only and seal it up nice and tight. In terms like for radon, if you fear you have a radon situation, you fear you have a mold situation, you feel you have some dampness, you can go ahead and do the pool liner. You don't have to dehumidify it. Not according to what the code seems to say. And that's up to you to make that decision whether or not in your home how you want to address an issue. So remember, straight up, in the IRC I just showed you, your crawl space has to be vented to a certain standard. If it's not vented to a certain standard, it's an old existing home, somebody better be showing me some actual damage, not just, well, I see some black dots on there and it might be. If my structure is compromised, you got a reason to tell me. Otherwise, that's an environmental inspection. And black dots, I get somebody who knows what black dots are supposed to be, whether they're a problem or they're not a problem. Okay? So if I don't have enough ventilation, one after the issue fixed could be a power ventilator. Okay? Triggered off of humidity. We have all kind of options. This is not the end of the world. And we see that mold, according to the state of Tennessee and the EPA, and what was the other one, Department of Health, whoever they were, they don't consider mold a problem. Now, maybe if you're allergic to mold, you might want to address it. That's up to you. And you can do it by different ways. One of the first things is to just drive more air through it. If that doesn't work, you can put the class 1 barrier, the filter in there, still leave it ventilated at that point, because you have to have 1/15,000th of the ventilation if you use the pool liner. But it can still be ventilated. You only have to have, according to what we just looked at, the HVAC to dehumidify it is if you cut off the ventilation, if you block up the vents. So you can see, if you have some bad information, how this could lead to some very expensive things being put in that may or may not be necessary to address the situation. So I don't give advice. I sell homes, I list homes. So have I run through all of my bits and pieces? I'm checking my tabs. We've done radon, we've done mold, we showed the power ventilator, we've done the home inspection bit, and we've talked about the lead paint under disclosure, we've talked about the environmentals, we've talked about calling a septic person for the undergrounds or whatever. And yeah, I think we hit radon, we hit underfloor spaces, we hit termites. Termites is another separate inspection, right? We talked about that. And it's not just termites, remember. It's termites and wood-destroying organisms, which are three funguses, brown rot, right rot, and the one with the rhizomorphs, if I can remember that fancy name. I can remember Stachybotrys charum, but I can't remember the third thing. I do know that it's got to have 28% moisture. The wood has got to be 28 moisture. So when do we normally find some of these rots? Look at what's causing it. Is it a drain that's leaking? Did a dishwasher leak? Did we have a toilet flange that wasn't sealed up right? Did we have a roof leakage on the covering which led around a fireplace or something? We need to ask why we need to do something with definitive answers, because I see water staining on the decking above. Did you probe it? Yes, it seems sturdy. Okay, was it damp to the touch? Was it visibly damp after the? No, it wasn't. Okay, maybe it was an old. It may be a 30-year-old leak before they put 2 more roofs on this old house. Who knows? So the question is, we need to see evidence of water. Water causes mold. Water causes all these problems. So, it's a common sense thing. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're paying for an inspection, make sure you ask your inspector to explain what they mean by it, and be looking out for questions such as, well, I just think it's better. Well, better for whom? If you tell me I need to get my HVAC inspected, did it come on? Did it get cold? Yes. Okay. Well, why should I get it inspected? Why are you telling me specifically to get it inspected? Did it work? Yes. No. Well, if it didn't work, I need to get it inspected. I need to get somebody checking it. We need to get it repaired. But it just might be old. Or it might have been serviced last year. Who knows exactly the condition of something that's still working? So you need to ask intelligent questions, and don't just accept people's, well, I'm just going to do it this way. Let's close off the crawl space and wall it all up, and because you might end up inviting termites if you insulate it. If you don't insulate it, your floor is insulated and it's ventilated. You only need very little air when you put the pool liner down, if it's even necessary. But you don't even have to. I've had people freak out. Oh, there's no liner up underneath. There's just plain old dirt. Well, do you see a bunch of thousands of little fingers coming up from the dirt eating your wood? That'd be termites. Okay, is it dry under there? Do you see? Show me something. Use some common sense. All right, well, I've run on long enough on this one. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. And remember, this is entertainment. This is not not practicing law, not dissing anybody, just trying to maybe feel out a little bit more about where everybody's lane is. And my job is to tell you, the potential buyer, get all of your inspections between this window, and it's up to you to decide what you want to get inspected. Okay? And Radon, normally you can get a free test from the state of Tennessee. We're kind of got that shut down. I think it's probably because of COVID. You can get a test anytime you want. You can go down to Home Depot or whatever, pick one up. It's a simple thing. You pull it off, you put it in, maybe you get 2 of them in the house, so in case one doesn't work. Usually they say take a closet or something that doesn't have a lot of air storage around it, put it in there for a number of days, sign the information, send it in, you get a report back. And then if you have a crawl space house, a lot of times just not being adequately vented is a problem. So if you ventilate that house and the air comes up and radon with it, a lot of times you can take it out. Otherwise, if you do a radon remediation system, you might have to do something a little bit more invasive. So it's just your choice, your life. I'm here to help. I'm not here to tell you what to do. So thank you. I hope this has been worth watching. I know I tend to ramble on, but it's a hard thing to show. Another thing, for instance, like moisture, with the moisture problem. I've had somebody tell me, oh, the code now requires you to take your drain water, your runoff water from your roof 10 feet from the house. And that's not true. It can be true. It may not be true. It depends. Do you have a certain amount of slope it requires? They say if you cannot get the slope away from your house at a certain grade, at a certain footage over a period of time, then you have to divert the water. Okay? Doesn't say you have to do it all the time. But it may be true in maybe one person's limited experience. They might have done a house and they had to do it in that house and the code people made them do it. So they think it's a requirement for everything. It's not. All of this stuff changes depending on so many other things. So ask questions. Ask questions of the people you hire as experts and see if they can answer them for you. I mean, in my case, I can only handle what's in my lane, getting that paperwork and getting it marketed and doing your bit. But I do know folks, and I do know a little bit, and so maybe I can be of use for you. All right, thank you. That's it. We'll see you. Thanks for watching.